You know, there's something I've noticed over the years working with people who come to me in states of absolute desperation. They arrive at my door convinced they're falling apart, that something has gone terribly wrong with them, that they're losing their minds or their grip on reality or whatever it is they think holds them together. And they describe these symptoms to me, these experiences that frighten them so deeply. The dreams that won't stop coming, the sudden floods of emotion that seem to come from nowhere, the old certainties that no longer feel certain, the roles they've played their whole lives that suddenly feel like costumes that don't fit anymore. And I sit there listening, and I'm thinking to myself, you have no idea what's actually happening to you, do you? You think you're breaking down? But what if I told you that what you're experiencing, this thing that terrifies you so much, is not a breakdown at all? It might actually be the opposite. It might be the beginning of something you've been waiting for your entire life without knowing you were waiting for it. A breakthrough. Not the kind of breakthrough we talk about in casual conversation. Not some minor insight or small improvement. I'm talking about a fundamental reorganization of your entire being. A death and rebirth, if you will. Though that sounds rather dramatic when I say it out loud like that. But it's true. You're not falling apart. You're falling together in a new way. And your psyche knows this, even if your conscious mind is terrified of it. The problem is, we've been taught to fear this process. We've been taught that stability is the goal, that consistency is virtue, that holding yourself together at all costs is what mature adults do. And so, when the psyche begins its natural process of transformation, when it starts dismantling the structures that no longer serve you, you panic, you think something's wrong. You reach for anything that will make it stop. Medication, distraction, denial, whatever will return you to that false sense of stability you had before. But here's what I've learned, and it's taken me a lifetime of working with the unconscious to really understand this. The psyche has its own intelligence. It knows things your conscious mind doesn't know. It sees things you refuse to see. And when it determines that you're ready, whether you feel ready or not, it begins a process of transformation that cannot be stopped. It will not be stopped. You can resist it, certainly. You can fight it for years. But it will keep pushing, keep pressing, keep sending you dreams and symptoms and synchronicities until you finally surrender to what's trying to happen. I remember this one patient, let's call him Thomas, who came to me maybe 15 years ago now. Successful man, by all conventional measures. Good career, stable marriage, respected in his community. Everything you're supposed to want, he had achieved. And yet he was falling apart. Couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate. These terrible anxiety attacks that would come out of nowhere. He'd be sitting in a meeting and suddenly he couldn't breathe, his heart racing, convinced he was dying. And the dreams, my God, the dreams he was having. He'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, terrified by images he couldn't understand. Dark figures chasing him, buildings collapsing, floods and fires and chaos. He thought he was losing his mind, naturally. That's what anyone would think. And so he came to me asking, essentially, how do I make this stop? How do I get back to normal? How do I return to the person I was before all this started? And I had to tell him something he didn't want to hear. I said, Thomas, you can't go back. That person you were, that version of yourself you are trying to return to, he's gone. He's already dead, actually. What you're experiencing now, these symptoms that frighten you, they're not signs of illness. They're birth pangs. Something new is trying to be born in you. And the old structure, the old personality, it has to break apart to make room for it. He looked at me like I was insane. Birth pangs? He wasn't giving birth to anything. He was dying. Everything he'd built was crumbling. And I said, yes, exactly. It has to crumble. Because it was built on a foundation that wasn't really you. It was built on what you thought you should be, what others expected you to be, what seemed safe and acceptable and successful. But your true self, the person you actually are beneath all those layers of conditioning and expectation, that self has been buried for so long that it's now fighting its way to the surface. And it will not be denied anymore. The thing is, and this is what most people don't understand, the psyche always knows before you do. It knows when you've outgrown your current life. It knows when the persona you're wearing no longer fits. It knows when you're living a lie, even a comfortable lie, even a successful lie. And it will create crisis to force transformation. Not out of cruelty, you understand, but out of love. Out of a deep wisdom that knows you're capable of so much more than the small, safe life you've constructed. I've seen this pattern hundreds of times now. Someone comes to me in crisis, absolutely convinced their life is falling apart, and when I look at what's actually happening, I can see that their psyche is quite deliberately dismantling the false structures so the true self can emerge. The timing is never accidental either. It often happens right when you think you finally got everything figured out. Right when you've achieved what you thought you wanted. Right when everything looks perfect from the outside. Because that's exactly when the unconscious says, all right, enough of this performance. Enough of this false self. It's time for the real work to begin. And the real work, let me tell you, the real work is terrifying. It requires you to face everything you've been avoiding. Every shadow you've projected onto others. Every part of yourself you've disowned and buried. Every truth you've been too afraid to acknowledge. The psyche will drag all of it into the light, and you'll feel like you're going mad because suddenly you're seeing things about yourself, about your life that you've spent years not seeing. Suddenly the marriage that looked fine from the outside feels suffocating. The career that seemed so important feels meaningless. The persona you've cultivated so carefully feels like a prison. And you think, what's wrong with me? Why can't I just be grateful for what I have? Why can't I just be normal? But normal, you see, normal is the problem. Normal is the cage. Normal is the false self that the psyche is now trying to destroy. I had another patient, a woman in her 40s, who described it perfectly. She said it felt like there were two people living inside her. The person everyone knew, the person she'd been for decades, reliable and responsible and appropriate, and then this other person, this wild thing that was trying to break free, that wanted to say what she really thought, do what she really wanted, live according to her own nature, rather than everyone else's expectations. And these two were at war inside her. The old self trying desperately to maintain control. The new self pushing relentlessly toward freedom. And the battlefield was her body, her dreams, her emotions. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't function in the ways she used to. And she thought this meant something was wrong with her. But I told her, nothing is wrong with you. Something is finally going right. After 40 years of living according to someone else's script, your true self is demanding to be heard. This is not illness. This is awakening. Now here's the part that nobody tells you about awakening, about transformation, about breakthrough. It looks exactly like breakdown first. There's no way around this. The old must die before the new can be born. The false structures must collapse before authentic ones can be built. And during that collapse, during that death phase, you will feel lost. You will feel like you're losing everything, your identity, your certainties, your sense of who you are, because you are losing those things. They have to be lost. They were never really you anyway. They were just costumes you wore, roles you played, ideas about yourself that you mistook for your actual self. And now the psyche is stripping all of that away, not to destroy you, but to reveal you, to show you who you actually are beneath all those layers of conditioning and performance and fear. But most people, when this process begins, they fight it with everything they have. They cling to the old identity even as it's crumbling. They try to hold together what's meant to fall apart. They medicate themselves, distract themselves, work themselves into exhaustion, anything to avoid feeling what they're feeling, seeing what they're seeing. And I understand this, I do. The death of the false self is genuinely terrifying. It feels like actual death because in a very real sense it is death. The person you thought you were is dying. That's not metaphor. That's not exaggeration. That's what's actually happening. And your ego, your conscious mind, experiences this as annihilation. It doesn't understand that this death is necessary for rebirth. It just knows it's dying and it's terrified. So you get all these symptoms, the anxiety, the depression, the insomnia, the physical ailments that have no clear medical cause. These are not signs that you're broken. These are signs that transformation is underway. Your psyche is working overtime, processing decades of accumulated material, integrating shadow content, reorganizing your entire psychological structure. Of course you feel terrible. Of course you can't sleep. Of course everything feels overwhelming. You're undergoing a complete metamorphosis of self. That's not supposed to feel comfortable. Think about the caterpillar in the chrysalis. If it could talk, what would it say? Probably something like, I'm dissolving. Everything I was is turning to liquid. I'm dying. Help me. It wouldn't understand that this dissolution is necessary, that it's not dying, it's transforming, that what feels like the end is actually the beginning of something entirely new. And this is you right now. If you're in that place where everything feels like it's falling apart, where you can't recognize yourself anymore, where the life you built so carefully is crumbling, despite your best efforts to hold it together, you're not ending. You're in the chrysalis. You're in that terrifying middle phase where the old form has dissolved, but the new form hasn't emerged yet. And there's nothing to do but trust the process. Trust that the psyche knows what it's doing even when you don't. Trust that this dissolution serves a purpose even though you can't see it yet. I remember another patient, a man in his 50s, successful by every conventional measure, beautiful family, respected career, financial security, everything society tells you should make you happy. And he came to me because he was having what he called episodes. He'd be sitting in a meeting and suddenly feel like he was outside his own body, watching himself perform. Or he'd be at dinner with his wife and realize he had no idea what they'd been talking about for the past 20 minutes. His mind had just wandered off somewhere and left his body there nodding and smiling on autopilot, and the episodes were getting worse, happening more frequently. He was terrified he was losing his mind. Maybe early onset dementia, he thought, or a brain tumor, something medical that could be fixed with the right treatment. But all the tests came back normal. Physically he was fine, which somehow made it worse because now he had no explanation, no way to understand what was happening to him. So we began to explore his dreams. And what emerged was fascinating, really. His unconscious was absolutely screaming at him. Every dream was about being trapped, about suffocating, about playing a role in some elaborate performance where everyone else knew their lines but he'd forgotten his. In one recurring dream, he was an actor on stage, and the audience was waiting for him to deliver his big monologue, but he couldn't remember a single word. He'd open his mouth and nothing would come out, just silence. And the audience would start to get restless, angry even, booing him, throwing things, and he'd stand there paralyzed, unable to speak, unable to move, unable to do anything but feel their judgment crushing down on him. Now, when I asked him about his waking life, about whether he felt this same sense of performance, of playing a role, he looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "What do you mean, playing a role?" he said. "This is my life. These are my responsibilities. This is who I am." But you see, that's exactly the problem. He'd become so identified with the role, with the performance, that he couldn't distinguish it from his actual self anymore. The successful businessman, the good husband, the responsible father, these weren't expressions of who he was. They were costumes he put on so long ago he forgot he was wearing them. And now those costumes had become so tight, so constricting, that his psyche was literally trying to shake him out of them. The dissociative episodes, the feeling of watching himself from outside, these weren't symptoms of illness. They were his unconscious, desperately trying to create some distance between his true self and the false persona he'd been inhabiting for decades. But he didn't want to hear this, not at first anyway. Because accepting this truth meant acknowledging that everything he'd built, everything he'd worked for, everything he'd sacrificed to achieve was in service of a false self, was in service of an image, a performance, a role that had nothing to do with who he actually was underneath all that. And that's a devastating realization. It's much easier to believe you have a medical problem that can be fixed with a pill than to face the fact that your entire life structure is built on foundations that were never truly yours. I see this pattern constantly. People come to me with symptoms, with complaints, with diagnoses. But underneath all of that, what they're really experiencing is the psyche's rebellion against inauthenticity, against living a life that doesn't belong to them, against performing a version of themselves that was constructed to please others, to meet expectations, to avoid rejection or judgment or failure. And the psyche will not tolerate this indefinitely. It can't, because the psyche's fundamental drive is toward wholeness, toward integration, toward the full expression of what you actually are. Not what you think you should be, not what others want you to be, what you actually are. And when there's too great a distance between who you really are and who you're pretending to be, the psyche starts sending signals, gentle ones at first, little whispers of discontent, a vague sense that something's missing, moments of emptiness even in the midst of success. But if you ignore those signals, if you push them down and keep performing, keep maintaining the false self, the signals get louder. They become symptoms. Anxiety that won't go away no matter how many breathing exercises you do, depression that descends for no apparent reason, physical ailments that doctors can't explain, insomnia, panic attacks, that feeling of being trapped in your own life. These aren't random misfortunes. These aren't chemical imbalances that need to be medicated away. These are messages from the depths of your being, telling you that something fundamental needs to change. But here's what makes this so difficult, what makes breakthrough so rare, even though breakdown is common. The false self doesn't want to die. It will fight for its survival with everything it has, because from its perspective, its death really is your death. It can't conceive of you existing without it. It's been running the show for so long it thinks it is the show. So when transformation begins, when the psyche starts dismantling those false structures, the ego experiences it as catastrophe, as everything falling apart, as the end of the world, and it mobilizes every defense mechanism it has to stop the process. It creates more anxiety to keep you distracted. It generates obsessive thoughts to keep your attention on surface-level problems. It convinces you that if you could just fix this one thing, get this one achievement, reach this one goal, then everything would be fine, and you could go back to normal. But you can't go back to normal. That's the whole point. Normal was the problem. Normal was the life you were living that wasn't actually your life. Normal was the false self pretending to be you. And your psyche has decided, unconsciously, that normal is no longer acceptable, that something has to give, that transformation must occur whether your conscious mind agrees or not. So you get this internal war. The old self trying desperately to maintain control, the new self pushing relentlessly toward freedom, and you're caught in the middle, feeling like you're being torn apart, because in a sense you are. The person you were is dying, the person you're becoming hasn't fully formed yet, and there's this terrible gap, this transitional space where you're neither one thing nor the other, where you've lost your old identity but haven't found your new one, where everything that used to make sense doesn't make sense anymore, but you haven't discovered what does make sense yet. This is the darkest part of the journey, this liminal space, this in-between. And most people, when they reach this point, they panic. They try to go back, they try to reconstruct the old identity, revive the false self, return to the life they knew, even though it was killing them. Because at least it was familiar, at least they knew how to navigate it. This unknown territory, this dissolution of everything they thought they were, it's too frightening, too destabilizing. So they retreat, they medicate themselves back to numbness. They throw themselves into work or relationships or substances or distractions, anything to avoid feeling what they're feeling, anything to escape the transformation that's trying to happen. And I understand this impulse, I really do, because I've been there myself. I've experienced that terror of dissolution, that feeling of everything I thought I was just falling away into nothing. And it's genuinely horrible. There's no other word for it. It feels like madness, like death, like annihilation. Your rational mind keeps saying, this isn't right, something's wrong, I need to fix this, I need to get back to normal. But there is no fixing it. There is no going back. The only way out is through. The only way to the other side is to allow the death to complete itself, to stop fighting the dissolution, to surrender to the process, even though every fiber of your being wants to resist it. And here's what nobody tells you, what you can't possibly understand until you've gone through it yourself. On the other side of that death, on the other side of that breakdown, there's something you couldn't have imagined. Not better in the way you think of better, not the old life restored and improved, but something entirely different. Something more real, more alive, more authentically you than anything you've experienced before. Because what dies in that process isn't you. It's the false version of you. It's the performance, the mask, the role you were playing. And when that dies, when it finally collapses completely, what remains is what was always there underneath. Your actual self. Not the one you constructed to survive, not the one you built to please others, but the one that exists prior to all that conditioning, all that fear, all that performance. This is what Jung meant by individuation. This is the process he spent his entire life studying and describing. The journey from the false self to the true self, from persona to essence, from who you think you should be to who you actually are. And it's not a comfortable process. It's not a gentle unfolding. It's a death and a rebirth. It's a complete dismantling of your psychological structure, followed by a reorganization around your authentic center. And yes, it looks exactly like breakdown before it reveals itself as breakthrough. Yes, it feels like you're losing your mind before you discover you're actually finding it. Yes, it requires you to let go of everything you've been clinging to before you can receive what you're meant to become. And so you find yourself in this strange place. Everything familiar has been stripped away. The identity you spent years building, the life you thought you understood, the person you believed yourself to be, all of it crumbling, and you're sitting in the rubble wondering what now? What comes after the death of who you were? Because that's the thing nobody prepares you for. They tell you about growth and transformation. They talk about becoming your best self, but they don't mention this part. This terrible empty space between who you were and who you're becoming. This liminal zone where you're neither one thing nor another. Not the old self anymore, but not yet the new self either. Just this strange suspended state of being, nothing in particular. I remember talking to a man once who described it perfectly. He said it felt like being a snake that had shed its skin, but the new skin hadn't hardened yet. Everything felt raw, exposed, vulnerable. He couldn't go back to the old skin, it was already gone, but he couldn't quite inhabit the new one either. He was just this tender thing moving through the world without any protection, without any clear sense of what he was or how to be. And this is precisely the stage where most people give up. They decide this whole transformation thing was a mistake. They try to reconstruct some version of their old identity, even if it doesn't quite fit anymore, because at least it's something, at least it's familiar. The uncertainty is just too much to bear. But here's what you need to understand, and I mean really understand. This emptiness, this not knowing who you are, this is not a problem to be solved. It's not a sign that something's gone wrong. It's the space where the real work happens. It's the fertile void from which your authentic self can finally emerge. You see, you can't become who you really are while you are still clutching onto who you think you should be. The old structure has to dissolve completely before the new one can organize itself. And that dissolution, that's what you're experiencing right now. That feeling of everything falling apart, of not knowing who you are or what you're doing or where you're going, that's not failure, that's the process working exactly as it should. Think about it this way. When you plant a seed in the ground, the seed has to break apart before the plant can grow. The seed doesn't gradually transform into a plant while remaining intact. No, the seed completely disintegrates. It dies. And from that death, from that dissolution, something entirely new emerges. But if you dug up the seed in the middle of this process, while it was breaking apart, you'd think something had gone terribly wrong. You'd see this mushy, decomposing thing and assume the seed was ruined. You wouldn't understand that this apparent destruction is actually creation in progress. And that's exactly where you are right now. In the middle of the breakdown that precedes the breakthrough. In the dissolution phase that has to happen before reorganization can occur. But your mind, your rational, controlling mind, it doesn't understand this process. It sees the breaking apart and interprets it as emergency. It sees the loss of identity and calls it crisis. It experiences the uncertainty and labels it danger. And so it panics. It sends out alarm signals. It tries to force you back into some kind of structure, any structure, because structure feels safer than chaos, even if that structure is a prison. This is why so many people abort the transformation right at this critical juncture. Right when they're closest to the breakthrough, they retreat back into the familiar patterns. They remarry the same type of person they divorced. They return to the same kind of job they quit. They reconstruct the same limiting beliefs they'd finally started to question. Because the unknown is just too terrifying to inhabit for very long. I've seen this pattern repeat itself countless times. Someone comes to me in the midst of this dissolution phase. Everything in their life is falling apart. They're confused, disoriented, frightened, and they want me to help them fix it. They want me to give them a new structure to replace the old one, a new identity to step into, a clear path forward. And I have to tell them, gently but firmly, that this is not how it works. You cannot skip the chaos. You cannot bypass the uncertainty. You cannot jump from the old structure directly to the new one without passing through the void in between. The void is not optional. The void is essential. It's where the transformation actually happens. And here's something else, something that might sound strange. The worse it feels, the closer you probably are to break through. I don't mean this in some sadistic way, like suffering is noble or pain is virtuous. I mean it quite literally. The most intense discomfort usually happens right before the shift, right before the reorganization, because that's when the old structure is most completely dissolved, when you are most thoroughly stripped of your familiar defenses and identities, when you are most open and vulnerable and raw. And that rawness, as painful as it is, that's actually the condition necessary for genuine transformation. You cannot transform while you're defended. You cannot become new while you're clinging to the old. The defenses have to come down. The old identity has to dissolve. And that process, it feels like death, because in a very real sense it is death. The death of who you were. But here's what nobody tells you. What you discover on the other side of this death, you realize that what died wasn't you. It was never you. It was just the costume you were wearing, the role you were playing, the character you'd constructed to navigate the world. And underneath that character, underneath all those layers of conditioning and performance and pretense, there's something else. Something that was there all along but got buried so deep you forgot it existed. Your actual self. Not the self you built, not the self others expected you to be, but the self that exists prior to all that construction. The self that was there before you learned to perform, before you developed defenses, before you absorbed all those messages about who you should be. And this original self, this authentic core, it's not damaged, it's not broken, it doesn't need to be fixed or improved or developed. It just needs to be uncovered, remembered, allowed. And the only way to reach it is through this process of dissolution, through the breakdown of everything that isn't it. You cannot think your way to this self. You cannot construct it through effort and willpower. You can only allow it to emerge by releasing everything that's covering it up. And that's what's happening right now, in this terrible, uncomfortable, disorienting phase you're experiencing. The false structures are dissolving so the true structure can reveal itself. I want to tell you about a woman I worked with years ago. She came to me in the middle of what she called a complete breakdown. Her marriage had ended. She'd left her career. She'd moved to a new city where she didn't know anyone. And she was experiencing what felt like a total loss of identity. She would wake up in the morning and not know who she was. Not in some philosophical sense, but quite literally. She didn't know what she liked or wanted or believed. She didn't know how to be in the world. Everything she'd used to define herself, wife, professional, daughter, friend, all those roles had fallen away and she was left with nothing. Just this emptiness, this void. And she was terrified that she was losing her mind. But as we worked together, as we sat with this emptiness instead of trying to fill it, something remarkable began to happen. She started noticing things, small things at first. She'd be walking down the street and suddenly notice how beautiful the light was on the buildings. Or she'd be sitting in a cafe and find herself genuinely interested in the conversation at the next table. Or she'd wake up one morning and realize she wanted to paint, something she hadn't done since childhood. These weren't big dramatic revelations. They were just small, authentic impulses. Little sparks of genuine interest and aliveness that had nothing to do with who she thought she should be or what others expected of her. They were just pure responses to life, unmediated by all those layers of conditioning and performance. And gradually, very gradually, these small, authentic impulses began to organize themselves into something larger. Not a new identity exactly, but a new way of being, a way of moving through the world that was responsive rather than programmed, spontaneous rather than scripted, real rather than performed. She didn't become someone new. She became more herself, more present, more alive, more genuine than she'd ever been when she was trying so hard to be the right kind of person. The breakdown that had felt like annihilation turned out to be liberation. The death of her false self made space for her true self to finally breathe. And this is what's available to you right now. Right now, in this uncomfortable, uncertain, frightening phase you're experiencing. You're not losing yourself. You're finding yourself. You're not falling apart. You're falling together in a new configuration. Everything that's dissolving right now, every structure that's crumbling, every certainty that's evaporating, it's all making space for something more real, more authentic, more genuinely you to emerge. But you have to let it happen. You have to stop trying to force the process into something comfortable and controlled. You have to surrender to the chaos, trust the dissolution, allow the transformation to complete itself in its own time and its own way. This doesn't mean being passive or resigned. It means being present. It means staying conscious while everything you thought you knew falls away. It means bearing the uncertainty without rushing to resolve it prematurely. It means resisting the temptation to construct a new false self just to escape the discomfort of not having any self at all, because that's the trap, you see. That's what most people do. They panic in the void and grab onto the first new identity that presents itself. They replace one false structure with another slightly different false structure, and they call this growth, transformation, breakthrough. But it's not. It's just rearranging the furniture in the same prison. Real transformation, genuine breakthrough. It requires you to stay in the void long enough for something authentic to emerge. And that emergence, it can't be forced or controlled or predicted. It happens in its own time, according to its own logic. Your job is simply to remain present, remain open, remain willing to not know who you are for as long as it takes for your true self to reveal itself. And I know this sounds terrifying. I know every instinct in you is screaming for certainty, for structure, for some clear sense of who you are and where you're going. But those instincts, they're coming from the old programming. They're coming from the part of you that's still trying to maintain control, still trying to avoid the vulnerability of genuine transformation. The real you, the authentic self that's trying to emerge, is not afraid of this uncertainty. It's been waiting for this space, waiting for the structures to finally dissolve so it can finally express itself. And it's right there, not somewhere you need to reach or achieve or become. Right here, right now, underneath all the anxiety and confusion and fear, patiently waiting for you to stop trying so hard and just allow it to be what it is. This is the paradox at the heart of the whole process. You become yourself by stopping the effort to become anything. You find your true identity by releasing your attachment to identity altogether. You discover who you really are by accepting that you don't know who you are and probably never will in any final fixed way. Because the truth is, you're not a thing. You're not a static identity that can be defined and pinned down. You're a process, a flowing, changing, evolving expression of consciousness. And every time you try to freeze that flow into some fixed identity, you're betraying your own nature. You're trading aliveness for security. And that trade, it might feel safer in the short term, but in the long term it kills you. Not physically perhaps, but psychologically, spiritually. It turns you into a performance of a person rather than an actual living, breathing human being. And this is what's dying right now. This performance, this frozen identity, this false structure, it's finally collapsing. And yes, it feels like you're dying. But what's actually happening is you're finally starting to live, really starting to live for the first time, not as some prefabricated version of yourself that you inherited from your family or absorbed from your culture or constructed to please other people, but as whatever you actually are underneath all that conditioning. And nobody can tell you what that is. Not me, not any teacher, not any book, because it's unique to you. It's your own particular expression of the life force, your own way of being conscious in the world. But here's what I can tell you. Here's what I've observed in myself and in the hundreds of people I've worked with over the years. When you're close to breakthrough, when you're right on the edge of genuine transformation, certain things start happening. And if you know what to look for, if you can recognize these signs, you can stop fighting them and start cooperating with them. You can stop trying to prevent what's happening and start allowing it to complete itself. The first thing that happens, and this might seem strange, but you start forgetting things, not in a pathological way, not like dementia or something, but you start forgetting your own story, the narrative you've been telling yourself about who you are and where you came from and what it all means. That story starts breaking apart. You'll be in the middle of explaining yourself to someone, telling them about your childhood or your marriage or your career, and suddenly you'll realize you're not sure if it happened the way you're describing it. Or you'll remember an event you've told 100 times, and this time the details are different. Or you'll catch yourself using the same words you've always used, but they feel hollow now, like you're reciting lines from a script you no longer believe in. And this is disorienting, I know. Because that story, that narrative about yourself, it's been your anchor. It's been how you make sense of your life. When someone asks who you are, that's what you tell them. This is what happened to me. This is why I am the way I am. This is what I'm trying to do with my life. But when you're approaching breakthrough, that story loses its power. Not because it's false exactly, though parts of it probably are, but because it's become a cage. It's become a way of limiting yourself to what you've already been, rather than allowing yourself to become what you might be. I remember working with a man once, successful businessman, very articulate, very clear about his identity. He could tell you exactly who he was and why. His father was cold, his mother was absent, he learned to be self-reliant, built a company from nothing, proved himself through achievement. Very neat story, very coherent. And then he started therapy, and within a few months that whole narrative started dissolving. He'd come in and say, I don't know if my father was actually cold or if I just decided he was cold because it explained my loneliness. I don't know if I built my company to prove myself or if I just like building things and the proving myself part is something I added later. And this terrified him because without that story he didn't know who he was anymore. But that's exactly the point. That story wasn't him. It was a structure he'd built to contain himself, to make himself manageable and understandable. And now that structure was dissolving so the real him could finally emerge. The him that couldn't be captured in any narrative. The him that was too alive, too complex, too constantly changing to fit into any fixed story. This is what I mean when I say you're forgetting yourself. You're not losing your mind. You're losing the mind you constructed. And that's necessary. That's part of the process. Because you can't become who you really are while you're still clinging to who you think you are. Another thing that happens right before breakthrough, and this one is particularly uncomfortable, is you start seeing through other people. Not in a judgmental way necessarily, but you start noticing the games they're playing, the masks they're wearing, the stories they're telling themselves. And this creates a terrible loneliness because suddenly you can't participate in those games anymore. You can't pretend along with them. You can't perform your role in their drama because you've seen that it's all performance. You'll be at a dinner party and everyone's playing the game. Someone's performing success, someone else is performing humility, someone's performing concern, someone's performing sophistication, and you can see it all so clearly now. Not because you are better than them, not because you've achieved some superior level of consciousness, but because the same mechanism that's dissolving your own false self is making you aware of everyone else's false self too. And you can't unsee it. You can't go back to believing in the performance. And this is isolating. God, is it isolating? Because you realize that most of what passes for human connection is actually just masks interacting with other masks. Performances, recognizing and validating other performances, stories confirming other stories. And once you've seen this, once you've really seen it, you can't participate in it with the same conviction anymore. You can go through the motions maybe. You can be polite. You can play along to some degree. But there's always this awareness now that none of it is quite real, that everybody's acting and nobody's actually present. But here's what you need to understand. This seeing through, this awareness of the falseness, it's not permanent. It's not the end state. It's transitional. It's what happens when your own false self is dissolving, but your true self hasn't fully emerged yet. So you're in this in-between space where you can see the game, but you can't play it anymore, and you haven't yet found the alternative to the game. You're stuck in this desert of awareness where everything feels hollow and nothing feels authentic. And the temptation here, the real danger, is that you'll decide this seeing through is enlightenment. You'll think, oh, I've transcended the game. I'm beyond all that now. I can see what everyone else is blind to. And you'll wrap yourself in this spiritual superiority, this sense that you've achieved something that others haven't. But that's just another trap. That's just another false structure, another way of avoiding the real work, because the real work isn't seeing through other people's games. The real work is allowing your own authenticity to emerge, and that can't happen while you're standing in judgment of everyone else's lack of authenticity. It can only happen when you've compassion for the fact that everyone, including you, is struggling to be real in a world that constantly demands performance. That everyone is doing their best to find some genuine ground to stand on while swimming in an ocean of falseness. And maybe, probably, this is the hardest part of the whole process. This recognition that you're not special, that your suffering isn't unique, that your struggle to be authentic is the same struggle everyone else is having, whether they know it or not. And that realization, it can be humbling, or it can be liberating. Depends on how you take it. I've seen people get stuck here for years, in this space of seeing through everything and everyone, but not being able to find their own authenticity. They become cynical, bitter, isolated. They can tell you exactly what's wrong with everyone else, but they can't tell you who they are. They've mastered the art of deconstruction, but they've never learned the art of reconstruction. They can take apart any identity, any belief system, any structure, but they can't build anything real in its place. And this is a kind of death too. Maybe worse than the death of the false self, because at least the false self was something. At least it gave you a way to move through the world. But this cynical seeing through, it leaves you with nothing, just emptiness and superiority, and a terrible loneliness that no amount of intellectual understanding can fill. So, if you're in this space, if you're seeing through everything and everyone and feeling more isolated by the day, understand this. That's not the breakthrough. That's the preparation for the breakthrough. That's the clearing of the ground. And the next step, the crucial step, is not to keep analyzing and deconstructing and seeing through. The next step is to allow something new to grow in the cleared ground, to stop being the critic and start being the creator, to stop tearing down and start building up. But you can't force this. You can't decide what to build and then build it, because that would just be constructing another false self, another performance, another mask. What needs to happen is more organic than that, more mysterious. You have to learn to wait in the emptiness, to tolerate the not knowing, to resist the urge to fill the void with some new identity just because the void is uncomfortable. And this waiting, this tolerating of emptiness, it might be the most difficult thing you'll ever do, because we're not trained for this. We're trained to always be doing something, always be fixing something, always be improving something. We're trained to see emptiness as a problem that needs to be solved rather than as a space that needs to be honored. But genuine transformation, it requires this emptiness. It requires this space where nothing is fixed and nothing is certain and you're not performing any role at all. Because it's only in this space that your true nature can finally reveal itself. Not as something you create or construct or decide to be, but as something that emerges naturally when all the false structures finally fall away. And when it emerges, when that authentic self finally shows itself, you'll know, not because it's dramatic or mystical or accompanied by lightning bolts, but because it feels simple, it feels obvious, it feels like, oh, this is what I've been all along. This is what was here underneath everything. How did I not see this before? And maybe that's the thing nobody tells you about breakthroughs. They're not loud. They're not accompanied by trumpets or angels singing or some cosmic announcement that you finally made it. They're quiet, almost disappointing in their ordinariness. You wake up one morning and you're making coffee and you realize you're not performing anymore. You're not trying to be anyone, you're just being. And it's so simple, so obvious, that you almost laugh. All that struggle, all that searching, all that desperate clinging and letting go and analyzing and deconstructing, and what was underneath? Just you, the actual you, the one who was there all along, watching, waiting, being patient while you exhausted yourself with all your various projects of self-improvement and self-destruction. But here's what makes this tricky, what makes people miss it even when it's right there. Because your mind will want to turn even this into a performance. It'll want to make authentic being into another role to play, another identity to construct and defend. And you'll catch yourself doing it. You'll notice you're performing authenticity now, playing the role of the person who's found themselves. And that's okay. That's actually part of it. Because each time you notice the performance, each time you catch yourself constructing another false self, you're getting clearer about what's real and what isn't. I've watched people go through this process hundreds of times, maybe thousands. And the ones who make it through, who actually break through to something real, they all have one thing in common. They learn to be okay with not knowing. They learn to tolerate uncertainty without rushing to fill it with some new belief system or identity or performance. They learn to wait, to be patient, to let things unfold in their own time rather than forcing them. Because here's the thing about authentic being. It can't be forced, can't be constructed, can't be decided upon and then implemented like some kind of strategic plan. It emerges, it reveals itself. But only when you stop trying so hard to make it happen. Only when you create enough space, enough emptiness, enough silence for it to show itself. And that space, that emptiness, it's terrifying for most people. Because we've been taught that emptiness is death. That not having a fixed identity means not existing at all. But it's actually the opposite. The fixed identity, the constructed self, that's what's dead. That's what's rigid and lifeless and suffocating. The emptiness, the not knowing, that's where life actually is. That's where creativity and spontaneity and genuine response can happen. Think about it. When you're locked into a fixed identity, You already know how you're going to respond to any situation. The anxious person responds with anxiety. The angry person responds with anger. The victim responds with victimhood. It's predictable, mechanical, dead. But when you're not identified with any fixed self, when you're resting in that space of not knowing anything yourself, you might respond in ways you never can happen. You might surprise, expect it. You might discover capacities you didn't know you had. And this is what the breakthrough actually is. Not the arrival at some final destination, not the achievement of some perfect state, but the discovery that you don't need a fixed self at all. That you can live from this space of not knowing and actually be more alive, more responsive, more genuinely yourself than you ever were when you were trying to be somebody. But I want to be very clear about something. This doesn't mean you become nobody. Doesn't mean you turn into some kind of blank slate with no personality or preferences or characteristics. You still have your particular way of being, your particular history and tendencies and ways of responding, but you're not rigidly identified with them anymore. You're not defending them or clinging to them or trying to prove them. You're just allowing them to be there, to express themselves, without making them into some kind of fixed identity that must be maintained at all costs. I remember a patient I worked with years ago, spent decades constructing this identity as a spiritual person, meditated every day, read all the right books, adopted all the right attitudes. And then one day she came to me in complete despair, said she couldn't do it anymore, couldn't keep up the performance, couldn't maintain the peaceful spiritual persona she'd worked so hard to create. And I told her, good, that's exactly what needs to happen. That constructed spiritual self needs to die so your actual being can emerge. And she looked at me like I was crazy. But we kept working, kept sitting with the emptiness that came when she stopped performing spirituality. And eventually, gradually, something else started to show itself. Not the spiritual persona, but an actual capacity for presence, for being with what is, without needing to be anything in particular. That's what I mean when I talk about the breakthrough. It's not becoming somebody better. It's discovering you don't need to be somebody at all. You can just be. And from that being, from that simple presence, everything else flows naturally. You don't have to figure out how to respond to situations. You don't have to consult your beliefs or your values or your identity to know what to do. You just respond, naturally, spontaneously, authentically. But here's the difficulty. The mind will keep trying to turn even this into a new identity. It'll want to make being nobody into being somebody who's nobody. It'll want to create a spiritual identity out of having no identity. And you'll have to keep catching this, keep noticing when you're performing again. Keep returning to that simple, ordinary being that doesn't need to be anything special. And maybe this is why the breakthrough happens right before it happens. Because you've exhausted yourself. You've tried everything. You've constructed and deconstructed so many identities that you don't have the energy to construct another one. You're too tired to perform anymore. Too empty to fill yourself with another belief system. Too worn out to pretend. And in that exhaustion, in that emptiness, something real finally has room to emerge. Not because you made it happen, but because you finally stopped trying to make anything happen. I've seen this pattern so many times. People come to me when they're at the end of their rope, when they've tried everything and nothing has worked, when they're desperate and exhausted and ready to give up. And I tell them, this is actually good news. This exhaustion, this desperation, this sense that you can't go on the way you've been going, that's not the problem. That's the preparation. That's the ground being cleared. That's the old structures finally crumbling so something new can grow. But you have to be willing to wait in the rubble. You have to be willing to not immediately start rebuilding. Because if you rebuild too quickly, you'll just construct another version of what fell apart, another false self, another performance, another prison. The breakthrough requires that you tolerate the emptiness long enough for something genuinely new to emerge. And that something new, it's not new at all. It's what was there all along, underneath everything. Your actual nature, your real being, the you that was present before you, started constructing all these identities and performances and masks. And when it finally reveals itself, when you finally recognize what you've been all along, the first thing you'll probably feel is relief. Just simple relief. Like you can finally stop trying so hard, stop performing, stop defending, stop explaining. You can just be. And being, you discover, is actually effortless. It's all the trying to be somebody that was exhausting. The being itself, that's easy, that's natural, that's what you are. So if you're reading this or hearing this, and you recognize yourself in what I'm describing, if you're exhausted from all the performing and constructing and trying to be somebody, if you're seeing through everything and everyone, including yourself, and you don't know what's real anymore, if you're in that space of not knowing and it's terrifying and uncomfortable and you want desperately to fill it with something, anything, then understand this. You're right there, right before the breakthrough. And the breakthrough isn't going to be what you think it is. It's not going to be dramatic or mystical or make you special. It's going to be simple and ordinary and obvious. It's going to be the recognition that you don't need to be anybody at all, that you can just be. And from that being, everything you actually need to do will emerge naturally, without effort, without performance, without the terrible strain of trying to maintain some constructed identity. The signs are all there, the exhaustion, the seeing through, the emptiness, the not knowing. These aren't problems to be solved. They're invitations to stop solving, to stop trying, to simply be present with what is, without needing it to be different, without needing yourself to be different. And in that presence, in that simple being, you'll discover what you've been searching for all along. Not out there somewhere, not in the future when you finally get it right, but here, now, in the simple, ordinary fact of your own existence, which was never actually a problem that needed solving, just a presence that needed recognizing. And that recognition, when it comes, it doesn't announce itself with fanfare. You won't suddenly feel enlightened or transformed in any grand sense. What happens is much quieter than that. You'll be doing something ordinary, making breakfast maybe, walking down the street, sitting in traffic, and you'll notice that you're not performing anymore. You're not trying to be anyone. You're not maintaining any particular identity or defending any particular position. You're just there, present, alive. And it feels so natural, so obvious, that you almost can't believe. You spent decades struggling to achieve something that was always this simple. I remember the first time I experienced this myself. I was in my study, surrounded by all my books, all my theories, all these elaborate frameworks I'd constructed to understand the psyche. And I was exhausted, completely exhausted from trying to figure it all out. And I just stopped thinking, stopped analyzing, stopped trying to understand. And in that stopping, in that simple cessation of effort, something became clear. Not clear in the sense that I understood it intellectually. Clear in the sense that I saw it, really saw it. That all this searching, all this analyzing, all this desperate attempt to understand myself and others, it was just another performance, another way of avoiding the simple fact of being alive. And once I saw that, really saw it, I started laughing. because it was absurd, utterly absurd. Here I was, spending my entire life studying the psyche, writing books about individuation and the self and transformation, and all along what I was actually doing was avoiding the one thing that didn't need to be studied or understood or transformed. The simple fact of existence itself, the basic presence that was there before all the theories and frameworks and identities, before I became Jung the psychologist, before I became Jung the thinker, before I became anyone at all. And this is what I want you to understand, what I need you to understand. The breakthrough you're approaching, it's not going to make you special. It's not going to make you better than anyone else. It's not going to solve all your problems or answer all your questions. What it's going to do is much simpler and somehow more profound than that. It's going to show you that you were never the problem to begin with. That all this struggle, all this suffering, all this desperate attempt to become somebody worth being, it was based on a fundamental misunderstanding. You already are, you always were. The only problem was that you couldn't see it because you were too busy trying to become it. But here's what makes this tricky. What makes people miss it even when it's right in front of them? The mind will immediately want to turn this recognition into another achievement, another identity to defend. You'll start thinking of yourself as someone who's had a breakthrough, someone who understands, someone who's more conscious than others. And that's just another trap, another way of constructing a false self. Because the breakthrough isn't about becoming conscious. It's about recognizing that consciousness was always here, that you are consciousness, not someone who has consciousness or achieves consciousness, but consciousness itself, aware of its own presence. And when you really get this, when it settles into you not as an idea, but as a direct recognition, something changes. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but you start noticing that you're not defending yourself as much, not performing as much, not trying to prove anything or become anything. You're just here, responding to what's in front of you without all that heavy overlay of identity and performance and pretense. And life becomes lighter, not perfect, not problem-free, but lighter, because you're not carrying around this enormous weight of having to be somebody all the time. I watch people struggle with this constantly. They come to me wanting transformation, wanting breakthrough, wanting to become their true selves. And I have to tell them gently but firmly that the wanting itself is the problem, not because wanting is bad, but because the wanting implies that what you're looking for is somewhere else, somewhere in the future, something you don't have yet. And as long as you're looking for it, as long as you're trying to achieve it, you're missing the fact that it's already here. You're already it. The only thing between you and the recognition of what you already are is all this effort to become what you think you should be. This is why the breakthrough often happens in moments of complete surrender, when you are too exhausted to try anymore, too empty to fill yourself with another belief system, too worn out to maintain another performance. In that moment of giving up, of not having any energy left to construct or defend or perform, something reveals itself, not something new, something that was always there but got covered up by all your efforts to be somebody. And I want to be very honest with you about something. This recognition, this breakthrough, it doesn't solve everything. You'll still have problems. You'll still struggle. You'll still experience pain and confusion and uncertainty. The difference is that you're not making it about yourself anymore. You're not turning every difficulty into evidence of your inadequacy. You're not constructing elaborate narratives about what it all means and whether you're doing it right. You're just dealing with what's in front of you, responding, adapting, being present with whatever life brings, without all that heavy overlay of self-judgment and self-doubt. I think about the people I've worked with over the years, the ones who made it through this process, who actually broke through to something real. And you know what strikes me most about them? They are not particularly special. They are not enlightened masters sitting on mountaintops dispensing wisdom. They are ordinary people living ordinary lives, going to work, raising families, dealing with the same struggles everyone deals with. But there's something different about them, something lighter. They're not carrying around this enormous weight of having to be somebody. They're just being. And from that being, they respond to life naturally, spontaneously, without all the performance and pretense that most people think is necessary. And maybe this is the real breakthrough. Not becoming somebody better, not achieving some elevated state, but discovering that you don't need to achieve anything at all. That you can just be. And that being, that simple, ordinary presence is enough, more than enough. It's everything. Because what you've been searching for all along, what you've been trying so desperately to become, you already are. You've always been. The only thing that was missing was the recognition, the seeing, the simple acknowledgement of what was always here. So if you're in that space right now, if you're exhausted and empty and you don't know who you are anymore, if everything you thought was solid is crumbling and you can't find any ground to stand on, if you're seeing through everything, including yourself, and you're terrified because you don't know what's real, then understand this. You're right there, right at the edge. And what you need to do, the only thing you need to do, is stop trying, stop searching, stop performing. Just be present with what is, with the confusion, with the emptiness, with the not knowing. Don't try to fill it, don't try to fix it, don't try to understand it. Just be with it. And in that being with, in that simple presence without effort or performance or pretense, something will reveal itself. Not dramatically, not mystically, but quietly, naturally, inevitably. Like dawn breaking after a long night, you won't suddenly become enlightened. You won't achieve some special state. What will happen is much simpler. You'll realize you're already what you've been looking for. Already whole, already complete, already enough. And that realization, that simple recognition, it changes everything without changing anything at all. Because you're still you, still living your life, still dealing with your problems, but you're not making it about being somebody anymore. You're just being. And being, you discover, is the only thing that was ever real, the only thing that ever mattered, the only thing you ever were. This is what I've learned after a lifetime of studying the psyche, after decades of working with people in their darkest moments, after my own struggles with madness and meaning and the terrible weight of trying to understand it all, that the answer was never in the understanding, never in the theories or the frameworks or the elaborate systems of thought. The answer was always in the simple fact of being alive, of being present, of being here without needing to be anyone in particular. And once you see this, really see it, everything becomes possible. Not because you've achieved something, but because you've stopped trying to achieve anything at all. And in that stopping, in that surrender, life finally has room to live itself through you, naturally, spontaneously, without all the interference of your efforts to control and construct and become. So stop trying, stop searching, stop performing. Just be. Be with the emptiness. Be with the confusion. Be with whatever is here right now. And trust that in that being, in that simple presence, the breakthrough you've been waiting for will reveal itself, not as something you achieve, but as something you recognize, something that was always here, something you always were. waiting patiently for you to finally stop trying and simply be.